it took a lot of thought and a lot of preparation, but that's certainly the path we're going down, because like these kids have huge amount of potential and they deserve to be in school. So that's what we want to do.
That was the CEO of Life Charity Focus Uganda, Anna Carter, touching on one of the most important reasons behind the work that both the charity and herself undertake in Uganda. Anna joined the show to share the story behind Life Charity Focus and why it is such a personal story and one that carries a lot of weight with her. She touches on the shift that the charity has taken in the last few years and explains some of the plans for them coming out of this year. A lot of the stories that Anna shares were incredibly eye-opening for me, and I really hope that you can take something out of this incredible story about a group of people that are doing incredible things. Thank you all for listening and subscribing, and please enjoy this episode with Anna. Okay, it's my pleasure now to welcome on the CEO of Life Charity Focus Uganda, Anna Carter. Anna, thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
No, the pleasure is all mine. I guess to start off, we'll just get you to give me a little bit of a rundown of what LCF is and sort of what it does.
Yeah, so Life Charity Focus was founded in 2015 by my parents, Jack and Dione Carter. It's a charity program run in Uganda, in Africa, and it's a non-for-profit organisation.
Founded in 2015, obviously there's probably a lot of work that went on before that to get it off the ground. Do you maybe want to touch on maybe the story for starting the charity and sort of, how it came about?
Yeah, sure. So there's a bit of a story behind it. It's quite a personal one. So shortly after I was born, I was the third girl to be born. So there's three of us in the family, three girls, and we all wanted a brother, and mum and dad didn't give us that. So we thought, well, what can we do? And we decided to sponsor, mum and dad sort of introduced it, and we decided to sponsor a child through Christian Children's Fund. And anyway, we all sat down and picked a child, and we decided to pick a little boy called Moses, who was 8 at the time. So it all started when he was 8, and we sort of grew up with him in a way. We wrote letters to him multiple times a year. We sent our dummies to him as a way of mum trying to get us off the dummy and things, and would send shoes and gifts, and we were quite involved in his life. Mum and dad paid a bit extra to put him through private schooling and private high school. And then Moses wrote a letter to us and asked if he could be put through university. So he decided he would study to become a health inspector, and we put him through to become a health inspector, which was a 4-year degree. And then mum said to Moses, well, if you pass university, we'll bring you to Australia, because at this point we hadn't met him. We just talked to him on a regular basis throughout the year, but had never met him. So he did the 4 years and passed with flying colours. And then so he would have been 21 or 2, and we decided to bring him to Australia for the first time, which was just like a whole new experience for him. He'd never been in a car for longer than 30 k's. He hadn't been in a plane or a city, so that was a whole experience for him in itself.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you? Obviously, you touched on he was 8, so you've sent letters and sort of communicated and known about him for over a decade, and now you're actually finally meeting him. Yeah,
absolutely. So it was sort of too good to be true. I thought, this can't be right. We're finally going to meet this guy who I've talked to since he was 8, and now he's coming to Australia. And anyway, we all met him at Dubbo Airport, and I remember him just walking through, so tall and skinny, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got photos of him when he was 8, when we started sponsoring him, and he was like a brother to us, because it's all we knew as a brother. So it was a really cool experience for us as well, because, after all those years of communicating and things, finally being able to meet him is a whole different thing in itself.
That's really cool, that the fact that you've literally seen the impact that sponsoring a child can have. just
Mm.
by the fact that, you sponsored him at 8, you've seen him finish primary school, finish high school, then go to university, become a health
Mm.
inspector, and now you're finally meeting him. I think, is that something that sort of always stuck with you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, for me to think, if we didn't choose Moses, this one boy on a website, if we hadn't chosen him, then he wouldn't have been able to go to school. He may not have never found a sponsor. So, like, he would have at 8 started harvesting the fields and doing adult like duties and things like that. So to think that you've transformed a whole child and their family's life just from choosing them off a website is pretty cool.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's also really interesting to look at it, and you can say, we sponsored one child, and
Mm.
you're like, that's one life, but it really isn't. If you look at the fact that this one child that you sponsored has gone through and done this, countless other lives have been changed. So it's
Yeah, yeah,
almost it's almost like you don't want to take a narrow-minded view where you go, it's
exactly.
only one person that I can help. Like
Yeah.
what that person, who that person goes on to help, and then you can look at it sort of in a strange way. You can sort of look like you're starting a cycle almost.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, exactly. And you always think to yourself, oh, you can't help everybody. But in a way, you sort of can, or you can transform a lot of people by just helping in a small way. Like, even though, like you said, you don't think you're doing enough or you're helping enough people, like by Moses, us helping Moses, which we'll talk about, like how it's changed thousands and thousands of lives, is pretty crazy.
So we'll keep on Moses, and so he comes to Australia. Was he a big driver behind the charity and starting the charity?
Yeah, so when he came to Australia for the first time, he spent a couple of months with us. And during that time, he said to mum and dad, he sat them down and he said, look, I can't thank you for what you've done. I can't thank you enough. I don't know what to do. I can't pay you for what you've done. I don't have anything I can give you. So the only way that I think I can help you is to start my own sponsorship program in light of what you guys have done for me, so then I can help other people the way you've helped me. So he was still quite young, like, early 20s at that point. And mum and dad were very supportive of Moses and said, yeah, right, well, we'll support you in whatever you want to do. We can look into it a little bit more, not knowing how it would get to where it is today. I think they had no idea that it would get this far.
Mhm.
So it all started from that conversation with mum and dad, and us girls. We had a chat to him about it, and we're all happy to support him in that. And then it all started from there. So we looked into what having a charity involves, what we have to do, how to get it registered, where to even start. And it was years in the making, sort of thing, of just ideas and communicating to people to ask for tips and things. And then in 2015, LCF was officially registered and established. So Moses and my mum sort of co-founded it. They spent a lot of time together and were really the drivers behind it. And yeah, so it started in 2015 officially.
Formed in 2015. I'd love to know what the sort of maybe the early days, what the early days were like for the charity, what the objectives, what the goals were behind it.
Yep. Yeah, so in 2015, all we had in mind was, let's just try to get children sponsored. We didn't know what that would involve, but after we got the 25 sponsored, we sort of had these 25 kids at 20 different schools, and that's when it sort of started becoming a little bit hard to manage. We had all these schools trying to make sure they were attending and getting to schools. So in 2015, well, late 2015, we sat down and we thought, how are we going to make this a little bit more effective so we can actually check on the kids and their families a little bit more regularly? So that's when we decided we'd build our own school, so then we could have all our kids at the school, and there was no troubles trying to get between schools and check on them. So that's where it all started with the school. So we built 4 classrooms to start with and a staff room. And at that point, so the end of the year, we had 50 kids in the school. And so then in 2016, when I went, we still had the 50 kids. Mum, dad, 2 other families came. were really excited to check out the school because obviously we bought the block of land and we started building the classrooms, but had no idea really what it looked like. So we got there and saw the 50 kids in the classes and the teachers, and yeah, it was pretty cool to see that we'd now built our own school in the middle of Africa.
Two questions there. Was that your first trip to Uganda?
Yeah. So 2016 was our first for any of us, mum and dad and anyone included, our first trip.
Okay, so what was that experience like for you? Obviously, it's, you sort of have a better understanding than most people of what life is like in Africa and Uganda, just purely because through the relationship with Moses. But I think seeing it like actually with your own two eyes is something that just sort of maybe people don't understand is, how powerful it can be. Maybe just touch on that first trip and what it was like for you personally.
Yeah, so it's hard to explain what it's like. It's sort of one of those things where you have to be there to believe it, because the stories I tell people, I don't think people believe me half the time. Yeah. Obviously I was 19 or 20, and I was a selfish teen and thought, yep, I'm going to Africa, it'd be really cool. And just the whole experience in itself, it was emotional, it was overwhelming, but it was also really rewarding because, we could see we had 50 kids that we were educating in the classroom in a private school, our own school. It was well run, they were getting fed. But I think something that blew me away in those early days, like that first trip, was knowing that, there was kids who couldn't come to our school purely because of like back pocket change, like what we consider back pocket change, like it's $2 a day to send a child to school pretty much over there to a good private school, which is just our back pocket change. And I just couldn't comprehend that, like, something that we had so easily and it was so accessible, like not even a coffee a day, would send a child on the other side of the world to school. And I probably didn't realize in 2016 the impact that education had. And that's where I sat down and I realized, right, the only way really to kick poverty in the butt at all is through education. And I probably didn't realize until I went there, because I saw the kids in class and I saw how it transformed their lives and their families' lives.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, you and me grow up, education is something that it's not even like, it's something that we simply get. It's not, these kids, they would, jump at the opportunity, and so many of them don't get it. Whereas, I mean, talking about being a selfish teen, I hated school. So
so did I.
And it's sort of, I can only imagine, obviously I've never experienced that, and I'd be thrilled to get your sort of opinion on this, is just how grateful the kids are, to be getting this education compared to, say what I was like when I was at school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, I really disliked school. I never enjoyed it for a second. And I struggled my way through school, but over there, like seeing, they live in little grass, and what they love, what they're most grateful about is the fact that they can actually leave their home, leave their adult responsibilities, because often a child over there, a child who is 6 cooks for a whole family. A child who's 5 or 4 looks after the babies, their little baby siblings. So I think the fact that they can leave their adult responsibilities and their home to go to school, to be fed and educated and fussed over a little bit, that to me is why they're most grateful, because they get a whole different experience on the world a little bit.
Yeah, that puts everything into perspective. And that's, I mean,
just... these kids would walk, like at the start we had kids walking 10-15 k's to school. Like they would do anything to get to school. They just wanted to be able to get an education.
Yeah, I mean like a comment like that just literally puts it into perspective, like, without even experiencing it like firsthand.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to know how that first trip, and I guess we can get into sort of when you started to get, heavily or more involved with the charity. I would love to know how that first trip really impacted maybe what you either saw for the charity, or where you thought that you could maybe take it or really make an impact.
So yeah, in 2016, when we went on our trip, I still wasn't very heavily involved. I had my sponsor child, and I got to meet her and her family on that trip. And as life-changing as it was, I still wasn't very heavily involved. I knew mum was taking care of the admin side and she didn't ask for my help. And, so I just sort of helped where I could. And anyway, after that trip, it did sit with me and I thought there's got to be more that we can do, whether it's more kids in school, like what can I do? And obviously I'm studying at the time. So I was studying speech pathology at uni and I was in my second year at that point. So I went back to uni. Not much changed at that point. And then at the end of 2016, September 2016, my dad broke his neck and that changed family dynamics hugely. So mum was obviously running the charity and the school had 50 kids in it at that point. So it was, it was a pretty big thing it doesn't sound a lot, but it is a big thing to run. There's lots of correspondence and all the finance side of things. And anyway, so yeah, he broke his neck and I said, Mum, I'll take over the charity. I didn't know what that meant. I just thought, yep, I'll organise all the photos and the letters and do the monthly reconciliation and everything. Had no idea what I was actually getting myself into. And I'm 20 at that point. So I took it over. She showed me the ropes. She was taking full-time care of Dad, so she didn't have much involvement at that point. And then so I got to know, how the charity ran a little bit more. And then in 2017 was when I went to Uganda on my own.
About that trip in 2017, was there anything that obviously now you're going there with a completely different mindset now that that you have the ropes essentially. Was there anything during that trip that sort of maybe stood out to you that you sort of said, I want to take the charity in this direction or in that direction, or anything that you took, because obviously going for the first time is an overwhelming experience, but you're going there for a second time now. You sort of have to look at the trip in almost a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I took it over, I became really passionate about it. It was something it was like my little baby. At night after uni, I do all the charity work, and I got social media up and running, and so we had about 50 kids in the school in 2016, when I took it over, and we only had 25 sponsored. So between that happening when I took over the charity, I really advertised it and got it out there a little bit more, and we went from 25 sponsors to about 80 sponsors, and we got another 50 kids in the school, so at 100. So yeah, in 2017, when I went over on my own for 7 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was more, like you said, it was more of a work trip in a way. Like I was going there with a purpose, not just to experience it in itself. So I went with a purpose and knowing what I had to do. 2017 was when my life really changed in Uganda. Like that's when, because I went on my own, I think I got to experience it completely different, and I had the power to transform so many lives, and I didn't realize I had that power to do that. Like social media was a huge thing, and if I put a child's profile on social media, that meant a lot of the time they got to go to school. So it was a crazy experience because I could just transform these kids' lives so easily at that point.
It is sort of crazy, and I've seen the pictures of the kids on there, and it's very difficult to to look at the photos and they're so happy and to not actually sponsor them all.
I know.
Yeah.
It's hard. That's the hardest part of the whole thing. And I get people say to me all the time, who's the neediest, or who do you think I should choose? And like the reality is they're all as needy as each other. So it's not about who's the neediest, it's about who you connect with online.
Yeah, exactly.
Through the website. Yeah. But yeah, back to 2017. So I went over on my own, and the school was running really well. So my purpose was sort of to see how the school was running, what we needed to change, how staff was going. Did we need more teachers? How many kids did I need to put onto the sponsorship program? And in 2017, when I went over, I with social media as my big help, I advocated a lot for LCF, and I got a lot more sponsors and a lot more word of mouth out there. So our school went from 100 kids in the school to 400 kids in the school at that point. And how many of those were sponsored? Probably 100 were probably sponsored at that point. Still not very many sponsored, but enough to sort of keep us going. And then, yeah, at the end of 2017, during Christmas time, which is normally our biggest time, we got a huge amount of kids sponsored. And again, I think it's from people seeing the photos of me over there and seeing that, like, there's a bit of a personal connection, like, oh, I know Anna, and here she is with all these kids. And, you know, it's more of a personal way than it's not some big, huge charity that you don't know anyone in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think that's why this is such a cool story, is because, you know, to be honest, like I hadn't heard of the charity.
Mm.
And you know, just before we got on, I sort of explained, it's one of those things where, like, you know, that it's like, it's not something that you're shocked about. You're like, oh my God, like, things in
Yeah.
Uganda are, this is how it's like you know it's there. But
Mm.
you know and that's why this story is so important, is because we're now bringing sort of a personal story, and we're putting
Mm.
it in front of people.
Yeah, in that 2017 trip, we did a lot of village visits, which pretty much just consists of Moses and his family taking me in a van around all the villages where our families live and checking up on them. You know, do they need medical attention? Is everything okay at home? During that village visit, we were driving along and I saw two little boys out the window, and I said straight away, Moses, stop. I just knew something didn't look right. And I went to get out of the van, and they spotted me, and they just like took off running on their knees because they had a physical disability. So they ran across a field on their knees, and I'm running after them trying to catch up without trying to scare them too much. And they ended up leading me back to one of their grandfather's place. And that's where, that moment right there is where I think Life Charity Focus and myself changed. It was a real turning point for where our charity now headed. So Moses translated for me, and I got to learn that there was two boys. So Badru, who was 12, and Isma, who was 13. And these boys were born with a physical disability. It's not diagnosed, so we're not sure what it is. And when they were born, their mum abandoned them and their dad, because it's considered a misfortune if you have a child with a disability in Uganda. So they were abandoned and left in the care of one of their grandfathers. And yeah, so Badru and Isma, I met them and they soon warmed up to me. They were purely just scared of me because they'd never seen a white person before, and it was quite overwhelming. So they were teenagers, but they were so malnourished. So they looked like little toddlers, and they were mosquito ridden and like clothes torn to absolute pieces. And anyway, they took me in their house, which was a grass sort of hut, and I asked Moses to translate and ask where they slept, where the two boys slept. And the grandfather explained that they had dug two holes in the house, because the houses don't have cement, it's just dirt. So they dug two holes, and that's where Badru and Isma slept, in these holes, to keep them, you know, relatively warm. And I think at that point I was so overwhelmed, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even cry. I was just stunned, and I was like, they live in a hole, and they're 12 and 13, and they're sleeping in a hole. And another reason they ran from me, one, because they were scared of me. Two, they're not supposed to be out of their house or out of their compound, because if you've got a disability in a place like Uganda, you're not allowed to leave your house. Unfortunately, they're just very backwards that way. So anyway, Moses took me back to the school. It sort of sat with me, but it's one of those things I tried to put to the back burner. I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm just not going to think about it. And it soon ate away at me. And I thought, right, I've got to do something for these boys, and I've got to change the mindset of how people view people with disabilities in Uganda. So that's where the whole disability part of our charity started, was with these two boys.
Yeah, I personally could not imagine, how to even react to, to learning about, because this is obviously, I had no idea about the way, people with disabilities were viewed there. The sheer fact that, these kids were abandoned by their parents. Now they're 12 and 13, have been living with a disability, without the right care or any care really, and sleeping in a hole that they dug. Like, it's one of those things that just sort of like stops you in your tracks when you just hear about it, let alone when you're face to face. You're face to
Yeah.
face, and you're seeing it and learning about it. Obviously, that's such a powerful moment. How did that completely change your focus and mindset for the charity?
Yeah, so again, there's a bit of a story behind it. So that was 2017 on my trip on my own, and 2018 I decided to take my first lot of volunteers with me because we'd grown a lot as a charity. In less than a year, we had grown tremendously. I'd say at that point we would have been at 150 sponsors, and our school would have been at 600 children. So I took a heap of volunteers back with me in 2018. Oh, first, sorry, I did get Badru and Isma sponsored. So
Mhm.
I thought to myself, this is a whole nother kettle of fish. But do I try to get these boys sponsored? And I sort of didn't realize what that would entail in terms of children with disabilities aren't allowed to access private schools in Uganda. That's just one barrier that I crossed. But I didn't really think too much into it. I put their profiles up online and got them sponsored within minutes, which was incredible. So rather than putting them in our school because we couldn't, we just paid for medical care, support in the home, food, things like that. So yeah, I got those sponsored, and they were the only two with disabilities at that point. And then when I went back in 2018, I did say to myself, let's do more about this. Let's find other children with disabilities and see what I can do. And at this point, I'm in my last year of speech pathology, or my third year of speech pathology. And I've always wanted to work with children with disabilities, so it was a little bit of a passion of mine. So yeah, 2018 took my volunteers. Was a builder in there as well, so they kept building at our private school because obviously, like, our enrolments had grown tremendously as well. So we had to build another story onto our school. At that point, we had about 8 or 9 classrooms in 2018. And then in 2018 was the time when I really focused on disabilities, and I said to Moses, there's got to be more kids here like Badru and Isma. Where are they? I can't, I can't find them. And Moses said they're hidden in their homes because they're not allowed outside of their compounds, because they're a misfortune, they're bad luck. Just told me all these perceptions that people in a place like Uganda had believed in. And Moses said, if you're serious about this, I'll help you find them. So one day Moses took me out on a village tour, and we literally just had heard of people who had children with disabilities, and we'd turn up at their house and we'd say, do you have a child with a disability? And 9 times out of 10 they'd deny it because they were embarrassed about it. And after Moses talked to them, like, Moses was a very well-known and friendly guy, so he soon built rapport with them, and we got to know them a little bit more. And the kids with disabilities just came out like you would not believe, from seeing only 2 of them to a huge amount. Like, people started hearing about us, that we were looking for kids with disabilities to help. So within a day of driving around villages, I'd found probably 20 hidden in homes just within that day. Yeah.
That's crazy. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine doing that. Like, even let's take the schooling out of it. The fact that you just touched on there, where you said, we'll pay for the food, we'll pay for the medical. It's, that itself is, a lot of these kids probably never thought that they would get that. So,
Well, see, a lot of the kids with disabilities, not only are they hidden, if they're not hidden, they're, they're put out on the streets to beg, or they're sold, or they're used for things that you don't even want to talk about. So to think that, someone's going to help me and provide food for me and try to help my family understand my disability a little bit better, like, their life changes instantly, straight away. And I think it's slowly changing our community's perceptions, because I'll walk up to a child with a disability and pick them up in my arms and hug them, and people gasp and they're like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you're not supposed to interact with them. So from 2018 till now, a lot of perceptions are changing.
I think that's, sort of the thing we touched on at the start, where, you sponsor one child, and then you look at the cycle and how that goes around. You're essentially you pick up the child and you've got 10 people here who thought this is not allowed. They're
Yeah.
seeing that it is.
Yeah.
And then slowly, obviously, but that carries on. And then, eventually, you look at it, you are changing, what you're trying to change is obviously something it's a huge task. But uh, I would love to know how you're able to sort of stay within yourself emotionally and mentally in these moments, because for any normal person, these are overwhelming experiences, and it would be hard, I know, for me personally, to stay in the moment, to not sort of lose myself.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, look, it's important to address that because a lot of the volunteers I take, it's hard to prepare them. And I remember from 2016 was an overwhelming experience in itself, but 2017 when I was on my own and met Badger and Isma, these two boys with disabilities, you do take it home and it sits with you. And I probably learned closer to 2018 when I was more familiar with it all. I probably learned how to work it out a little bit better rather than getting stuck and thinking, I can't help them. What can I do? I sort of thought about, like, I flipped it around and thought, what can I do to make their lives better? And I think the way I cope with it is I've seen the worst of the worst. I've seen how they lived before they met, like before they were involved with Life Charity Focus. And, they're living in holes, or they're on the streets, they're begging for food and things. So I now focus on, right, like that's where they are. If I can help them, if I can give them a bed, like a $20 mattress, or if I can give them a $12 blanket, like that's helped them in the slightest way, but they think it's changed their life. And in a way it sort of has. So I just try to think of what can I do to make it better, whether it's something, like I think that's what's important to understand, like buying a $3 mosquito net actually almost changes a life. Like, so I sort of think about it like, what are the little things I can do to help, rather than get emotionally too caught up in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the side of me, like the business side of me. I'm like, right, what am I going to do to fix this problem? Like, how can I help them? And I think I probably avoid, like, it's a good question that you've asked, and I'm probably avoiding answering it because I avoid the emotional side of it, because I know if I address that, like there's been times where I'll get a phone call from Moses, and even this year where something's happened to a child with or without a disability, and you can't control your emotions, but I'm a really good avoider. So I just sort of just think, how can I fix, what can I do now? Like, rather than getting caught up in it.
Yeah, rather than letting it sort of maybe not block you from doing something, but something that, you're like, I could
into action straight away.
Yeah, like I could sit here for 2 hours, thinking about it, or I can get to work. And I think that's a very difficult place to get to. I think a lot of people probably would struggle with that, and I think I have a tremendous amount of respect for the fact that you're able to do that and sort of just get to work rather than sort of sitting back and being overwhelmed with the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but we work it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's one of those things when with what you're dealing with, essentially with what the charity is trying to do, it's something that's probably necessary too. If you're sitting back looking at the enormity of the situation, you sort of lose focus on the what you touched on, the small things that you can sort of chip away at and make a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly right.
Exactly. Do you think that getting a school for these kids with disability is something that the charity wants to do, or maybe is already working towards?
Yeah, so with our private school that we had built, it sort of became self-sufficient. Sorry. So in 2018, our enrollments were quite large, and some of them were private paying people, so they were paying for the operations of it, which is where we wanted to get our school to, so then we could do other projects. So that was really good. So 2018, our builder that we took, we just focused on the private school. We wanted to get it to a point where we could fit all the kids comfortably. And then when I went back in 2019, I had a handful of children with disabilities sponsored, and I had lots on the waiting list. And I did think, what am I going to do? I can't get them in to our school. I don't know how we're going to address this. There's no school in the district that's going to take them. or anywhere in the nation probably. And so 2019, I sat down with Moses in Uganda and I said, look, how are we going to do it? I think what we need to do is build a special school. And Moses laughed and he said, I don't know how we're going to do it. Like, it's, you know, you're now addressing a misconception of people with disabilities, like the whole community. We don't know if they were going to think, why are you going into this? Like, this is embarrassing for your charity. Do you know what I mean, Chris?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I didn't want them to look down on us. We were trying to do what we could, but also sort of slowly transform perceptions rather than just jump straight into it. Anyway, so we decided in 2019 we'd raise money to purchase a block of land, and, you know, we'd just leave it at that for the minute. So we purchased a block of land about 5 k's from our school with the intention of building a special ed school. And soon after, we had another charity ball and we raised a little bit more money, and we actually just thought, let's just do something and get right into it. So we started building our special school, and we got to 4 classrooms and a little carer's house on there, all the foundations. So we had 2 builders in 2019 help us with that. And then we pretty much just built until funds ran out. So that's where we're up to with the special school. So yeah, absolutely, we're going full steam ahead with the special ed school. It took a lot of thought and a lot of preparation, but that's certainly the path we're going down, because like, these kids have huge amount of potential and they deserve to be in school. So that's what we want to do.
Yeah, there's something you said there that sort of is just crazy for me to even think about, is that there's nowhere in the country for these kids to go. That honestly is mind-boggling to me, and you know, I think it's incredible. It's incredible that, you know, you address that. You say, okay, this is, you know, public perception's this. We're trying to change it. But we can't wait. We can't wait for it to change. You know,
exactly.
We have to, you know, it's a real fine balance between waiting for people's minds to change, or, you know, sort of going ahead and going, we're doing this with or without you, because there are kids who have been neglected for so long that need this and deserve this.
And I think the reason, like you said there, the reason behind me just literally going for it was probably when I met this one boy called Gapito in 2019. So I was actually just visiting a village. I wasn't visiting his house, and I happened to be driving past his house. And, you know, at this point, like, going to Uganda, and for the amount of time I used to go for, I had a very good eye for picking a child with a disability. So driving past, and I said, Moses, stop. Got out, and again saw this little boy run into a house, and we built a bit of rapport with the family, and they finally let us in. And there was a little boy called Gapito who, well, actually he wasn't little, he was 9, and he had Down syndrome, and he had been kept in a room in his house. So like a room, and I mean smaller than a garage shed room. And that was his room. He was allowed out onto the compound, you know, a couple of times a day, as long as there weren't people going past. And he's 9. And that was one of the moments where I lost it. And I thought, like, something has got to change. And Moses translated for him, and I got Moses to say to Capito, you know, I'm taking you to a school. You're going to go to a school one day. And to see Capito's overwhelming fact, like, he just didn't know how to comprehend that, and he sort of didn't believe his eyes. And I just embraced him and gave him the biggest cuddle, and he was crying because he couldn't imagine someone caring for him after 9 years of, like, being, you know, kept in a little room. So I think that was the point where I was like, nah, we're not holding off. Like, we are going to build this thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. It's in a way it's great that, you know, you were able to get that experience, because in turn, you know, if that's a thing that sort of, you know, pushes you and the charity over the edge to, you know, to be like, all right, boots on the ground, let's go. Then ultimately it's an incredible thing that you were able to, you know, to experience that.
Yeah. And like, now we've got, since then, we've got probably 50 children with disabilities sitting ready to get straight into our school when it opens. And each child that we've met and enrolled with LCF that has a disability, like, they each have their own unbelievable story. that, you know,
Yeah.
we could talk about for it. Like, it's stuff that you just can't fathom that they've been through. A lot of them aren't with their families. A lot of them, their families abandoned them, so they're with, you know, a grandparent or someone who just decided that they take them in because they have a bit of good in their heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just have these kids sitting and waiting, ready to go in when we open it.
Yeah, no, it's incredible to hear, and yeah, obviously 2020 has been a difficult year for everyone. I'm guessing how has that sort of maybe changed the focus of the charity or
Usually I go over every year for quite a bit of time, and I take a lot of volunteers. Obviously, I'd planned to do that this year, but all those plans changed. So the one thing we did want to do in 2020 was get our special school up and running, but that involved us having our 2 annual charity balls that we
Mhm.
raise money with. They've had to be cancelled. So although our kids thought it was going to be open 2020, we're hoping early to mid 2021 we can have our special ed school up and running. So, but I mean, you know, the good comes with the bad. There's a lot of good things that have come out of this year for us. We don't know what it is, but we've had more sponsor numbers in operate like since we've operated than ever. This
Mhm.
year, with our sponsorship numbers, it's just gone through the roof. And I don't know if that's because people are spending more time at home, wondering how they can help people in this time. We don't know what it is, but our sponsorship numbers have just raised incredibly, which is so great for our kids. You know, we've done a lot of online stuff. We've changed a lot of the way we operate. You know, you can send letters and photos online rather than waiting for the post. And yeah, the good comes with the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever sort of sit back and maybe take a moment and sort of just look at it as a whole and just go, how are we here, when we started here?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, only since talking to you off air the other day, I sort of sat there and I thought, because I often don't tell the full story, I don't have time to tell the full story, and I
Yeah.
just try to explain what LCF is quickly. But to think, you know, we chose one child off a website who, you know, we just wanted to pick a boy, and it just happened to be Moses, and
Mhm.
how he's had this vision. We've had a school that we built a school that we started with 50, and now, as of I checked this week, we have 1,200 kids enrolled in our school. So even just the school itself, the private school, like, to think that, you know, there was never a private school in our district, and now there's 1,200 students attending a private school in our little community. That in itself, when I sit back and think, and then you think how that affects their families, like, it's not just impacting the 1,200 children that, you know, they go home and they actually teach their own families, because a lot of their siblings can't go to school. So it has a cycle effect. And then yeah, with the children with disabilities, like, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. I've got to see and meet all these kids, and, you know, personally enroll them and hear their stories, and yeah, to see them now full and, you know, not malnourished, and their family slowly, you know, wanting to be more involved. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I can imagine that is. And if you think about it, these, 1,200 kids in the school, a
Mm.
lot of those kids are going to go on to have a
Oh,
similar path to,
yep.
following a similar path to, the one that Moses had.
Mm.
It might not be in health, they might not start a charity, but they might go on to university, they might, learn how to become a builder, and then, ultimately they see the effect that the
Yep.
charity's had, and they go, all right, I want to do that. I'll do the building. Like, and
Yep.
it's just one of those things where you're giving so many opportunities
Absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
giving so many opportunities to kids who probably didn't have if they had any at all. Like, they don't have many opportunities.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Like, we have kids in high school. We haven't had any leave high school yet, so we've got one. I've got a couple finishing next year, and it'll be really interesting to see what they do. But, you know, they've got all really big intentions to be doctors, nurses, teachers. Like, each one of our students want to become someone, and I think for them to be able to even have that hope and that dream is life changing in itself, because they've come from, like, for example, if our teenage girls weren't at school, most likely, like, the statistics show, they'd be pregnant and they'd be married, and So to think that rather than, being pregnant at 14, they can now go and become a nurse or a teacher, like it's a whole different life now that they get to experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. Do you, with obviously not getting into, not spilling all the secrets or whatever,
Yeah.
do you have an idea of where you want to take it next? Obviously finishing the special school is probably one thing, but is there anything that you've sort of been able to reflect on over this time and go, I think this is an area we can move into, or whatever it may be?
Yeah, so I've always got things in the back of my mind. I'm always thinking. So my plan is with our private school, I think that's going to be self-sufficient and it'll run itself, which is great. We can continue to expand, build a third story, build more boarding houses. That's an area that we'll always focus on because that's where we started.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when the special school is up and running, we'll move all our kids in and get comfortable. But I've already organised to buy land just off our special school. So we own quite a few blocks around our special school block now, with the intentions of building a medical centre and a rehab centre for
Wow.
our community, purely because, again, it all comes back to disabilities, because a lot of our kids, they've got cerebral palsy and lots of physical disabilities that they need a lot of rehab and medical attention for. So, but it's going to be accessible to the whole community. But that's where the rehab centre idea I thought, right, well, you can get physios and you can get speech therapists and things in the cities. And, we can encourage our kids in high school to go and study those things. And they're all so willing to come and work back in our community to help the community. So, yeah, that's my next plan, is the rehab centre and medical centre.
That's incredible. That's a incredible plan, and I think that's probably the perfect place to end it. If people wanted to get involved with the charity, where can they find it?
Yeah, so you can find us on all social media. So Life Charity Focus Uganda on Facebook and Instagram, and our website is www.lifecharityfocus.com, and that'll explain our story a little bit as well, and has all of our background and the profiles of sponsored children and things on it. Yeah.
Incredible. I'll make sure that I share all that information and have all that available for people. And I just want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing the story, which is a very personal one. Not only explaining what charity does, but explaining your journey to getting involved with the charity. It's an incredible story, and I really do hope that people get as much out of it as I did, because that was very it was an incredible story, and very touching.
Pleasure. No, thank you for having me and letting me share the story, Chris.
No, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much, and take it easy.
You too. Thanks, Chris.